Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me. I am still Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com. It's still in the description below the video. Reach out to me for pricing details. I am Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com. Today, we are discussing the first version of the second generation, a Lange Söhne 1815 chronograph launched in 2008. This rose gold model doesn't feel the later pulsometric scale, so we have an open, more expansive dial, not featured on later models, so some folks like this aesthetic. It's cleaner and more traditional and less crowded. The watch in rose gold is 39.5 millimeters in diameter. In terms of thickness, slim. It measures only 11.4 millimeters thick, and from lug tip to lug tip, 48.4 millimeters with a 20 millimeter spacing between the lugs. Mechanically, it is identical to the Dotograph up-down, with the exception that it does not feature a date and it does not feature a power reserve, which is why it can have all the Dotto bells and whistles on the case back, but still be under 12 millimeters thick. On my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, it wears beautifully. I would recommend it for a wrist as small as 15 centimeters in circumference. I'm only going for that relatively large size because at the end of the day, it is still over 48 millimeters from lug to lug. So 15 centimeters circumference wrist and up, and mine is 16. Taking a look at the strap. High grade, large rectangular scale, symmetrical scale, alligator leather, a very high quality cut of the beast, matte finished, medium brown with some red undertones. You can see a folded edge, a monotone stitch, calfskin on the bottom, a brand new Lange factory strap, no crimping, no gouging. We have Lange's well-known Brogioli made pin buckle. You can see a combination of soft creases in the fastening of the exterior, the Lange name, and then two features that I always shout out when I review a Lange watch. We have an elevated bridge, so you can see that the prongs on each side sit below the bridge. That allows the strap to sit flush inside. When it's buckled down, it doesn't add height on the wrist. Then you've got this little retaining bar here, so if you're like me with a small wrist, you're going to use the smallest hole or maybe even punch a smaller one, and if that's the case, sometimes a tightly strapped watch can get pinned on the pin. This little retaining bar restrains the strap from sinking to the bottom and getting pinned, making it easier to extricate from a small wrist. Lange cases really come in two styles, with the exception of the Odysseus. You get a cylindrical case with a polished flank, or you get a cylindrical case with a satin finished flank. Here we have the polished version. Everything here is polished. It has the notched lugs that Gunter Blumlein, one of the co-founders of the brand back in 1990, believed necessary to set Lange design apart from the rest of the luxury watch world, and it endures today even 30 years later. Now you can see that there's a little bit of a soft crease on the edge of the lug that actually expands as you move toward the case. You'll also note that the lugs actually ride up the edge of the bezel, and there is a small space between them. I don't know how well you can see that, but this is a trick that Lange designers use to extend the lugs while keeping the watch relatively thin. We have a vertical lip to the bezel and then a domed profile. And then we have the Lange logo on the crown with vintage-inspired rectangular chronograph pushers. It is a flyback chronograph, which means you can restart while resetting all in one motion. So if you're timing two events that occur in rapid succession, you don't want to have to stop, reset, restart. With a flyback, you just push the reset trigger and it works beautifully. Now the watch does have a hacking or stop seconds function, which is easier to activate with fingernails rather than gloves. So you can set the watch against a reference time. The dial, which is silvered, is actually made of silver. So the dial is made of sterling silver. It's then galvanized this silver white color with lacquer used to create the printed tracks for the time and then the numerals themselves. This having Arabic numerals, it is a Lange 1815. That's how you know it's an 1815, Arabic numerals. You can see that there's a step to the track outboard for the seconds, fractions of seconds, and minutes. There's a center disc, and then there are these two countersunk sub-registers. If you look very carefully, you can see those registers have concentric patterns internally, and then we have these beautiful fire-blued alpha-style hands for the hours and minutes, the hands black polished at center, with a counterweighted lancet-style seconds hand beating away at 2.5 hertz or 5 beats per second. Flip it all over, and this is why I say you get all the bells and whistles of the Dotto. The Dotto's hardware, to distinguish it from an 1815, is all on the dial side, so the case back is indistinguishable. Here we have the second generation generation Caliber L951, so it has a 60-hour power reserve rather than the original 36. This is the L951.5. It's got a free sprung balance now, and you can see that almost all the adjustments are done using variable inertia eccentric blocks on the balance rim, and the only very tiny adjustments made using the black polished steel swan's neck fine adjustment mechanism. We have a overcoil hairspring here, which is a rarity on Lange watches, a unique distinction. It allows the watch to keep better time in different orientations because an overcoil has a more centered mass than a flat hairspring. And of course, because most of the adjustments here are done using either a screw fixed index or eccentric masses, it is a very shock resistant arrangement. It is adjusted in 5 positions, just like a chronometer. That is the high horology standard. You'll see chronometers and really high-end watches generally adjusted in 5 positions. We have here a combination of a column wheel, which has been entirely black polished, and a lateral clutch, which is double finished. So you can actually see here we have black polish on part of the lateral clutch, and then we have satination on other parts. On the edges, we have a beautiful mirrored bevel, which is difficult to do on steel. And if you look carefully, you can see we have a sharp inward angle on one side of the clutch, and then another one on the opposite side. That's difficult to do on German silver or brass. On a material as hard as steel, it's an incredible act of virtuosity and craft. Now you can see we do have German silver bridges and plates, the golden hue due to the copper content. German silver is not actually silver, it's nickel, copper, and zinc. It's identical to the material used on most guitar frets because it's very corrosion resistant, and again, the copper gives it that hue. There's engine-turned perlage on the base plate, freehand engraving with a burn on the balance cock, a signature of a Lange Söhne. We have stripes or Streifen across the bridges. You could see these two feature their own mirrored bevels. And then we have both black polished screws and fire blued screws. And both feature chamfered slots in circumference. You can see some other black polished pieces finished off with a diamond paste, very difficult to do. Most chronograph parts are satinated on their top, but you can see they are mirror beveled on their edges. We have instantaneous jumping chronograph minutes and little golden chaton, both on the clutch and the bridges, that are used to hold the pivot jewels. It's not necessary in the modern era of watchmaking, but back in the 19th century heyday of a Lange Söhne, this is how jewels would have been set in bridges. So it is an homage to history. Some will claim it also makes a watch a little bit more shock resistant, though the jury is out on that one. You can also see that we have 2 different types of screws. We have blued screws, which are generally used to fix objects like bridges that don't move or chaton that stay put. And then we have the polished screws, which are almost universally associated with adjustment of the chronograph or the time-telling functions. And then all this is water resistant down to 30 meters. If you love this watch, reach out to me. I am Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for pricing.